out other tracks. There's great speakers. And I again thank the organizers for doing this.
All right, it is the top of the hour here. Matt, are you on?
Yes, I am online. Can you hear me?
I can. Coming through 10 by 10. Sounded good there. All right.
Perfect.
So I will, I've got the slides loaded, so just let me know when you want to advance, but I believe you are up to start.
Okay. Sounds good. So thank you so much. So hello, everyone. It's nice to meet everyone. Thank you for hopping onto this session and Today, we're going to be talking about how you can leverage Azure Synapse Analytics, Power BI, and Qlik data integration to gain real-time data insights from SAP. So I'm Matt Basile. I'm a program manager on the Azure Synapse Analytics team. I do a lot of work on building out our technical content, along with looking for ways to build out both our internal and external ecosystems. And David, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Yes, thanks, Matt. So my name is Dave Frericks. I'm on the partner engineering team over here at Qlik, where my role is technology evangelist, and I'll be here to talk about the Qlik data integration components today.
All right, thanks so much. So let's get started. So let's take us to the next slide. So today we'll really have three different parts to this session. We'll start by talking about how you can turn valuable data into valuable insights, and also talk about some of the challenges that both David and I have seen from Qlik and Microsoft's perspective that customers face in trying to do so. Because of course, if that step one was so easy, we probably wouldn't be here talking to you. In chapter 2, we'll talk about analytics-ready solutions for both SAP and non-SAP data, and how both the functionality and integration between Qlik and Synapse help to enable you to build out these solutions. And then finally, for the final part, we will actually show you a demo of some of this happening and show you both Qlik and Azure Synapse and how they work together over SAP data, as well as talk about an offer between Qlik and Azure to help you get started and get hands-on here. So chapter 1, or turning valuable data into valuable insights. So we'll start by kind of setting some background, and I'm sure this is something that many of you on this call are very intimately familiar with, but the idea that there is an urgent need for business guiding insights, and also the fact that this need is only growing. Every company and every enterprise that I talk to, there's the same phrases that come up: trying to be data driven, trying to bring about a cloud or a data transformation, and there's this understanding that is growing that you need to be a modern data-driven company to be able to compete, in this day and age. And not only do you need to be data-driven, but the speed and responsiveness you need to have to that data is only growing as well. And so we're starting to see that some of the existing tools and existing patterns are no longer suffice for this new age of data and information. We're seeing that static dashboards and KPIs simply aren't enough. There's a need for up to the minute or up to the second data, and business users need to be incredibly responsive. And this goes beyond just your typical operational systems that, of course, have been designed for this second to second transactional workload, but even analytical systems. The SLAs for refreshes are getting faster and faster as companies can no longer wait a day or a week for a data refresh to be able to have an up-to-date view on their company or their market. And on top of this, not only is the velocity increasing, but the granularity, or the need for granularity, is increasing as well. It's no longer just enough to have an overall view over your company or a general idea. Companies and enterprises need the ability to drill down not just in their typical data sources, but the ability to bring in new data sources as well to identify opportunities. One of my favorite stories is for a car dealership, or a car company was able to identify increases in sales for SUVs, or predict this increase by an increase in baby equipment, basically, diapers and formula and everything like that being purchased in the same area. And this was something they were only able to identify by their ability to bring in vast amounts of seemingly unrelated data and then get very granular with it to identify new opportunities and new ways to predict their own market. So moving on to the next slide. So we talked about this need, and so where do you actually get the data to answer these questions? Well, of course, ERP systems are very, very valuable sources of information. They contain data from a variety of systems: finance, product, procurement, customer service, HR, manufacturing. But of course, the question is, how do you actually work with this data, and what use does this data provide? So if we step forward one more slide, we'll have some things pop up on the side here. And when we look at this ERP data, it's about the value you can get from it. And of course, with a vast amount of data, there's a vast amount of value to be gotten from it. And so we've seen use cases of customers finding ways to reduce supply chain leakage or improve customer experience. These are things like, once again, like I said, where you need both responsiveness, but also granularity. It doesn't matter if you understand the customer experience if it takes you weeks or months to get back to them. And same with reducing supply chain leakage. You may need to get incredibly granular to understand, the minute problems in individual regions or even distributors to understand how to optimize these processes. We've seen optimizing order to cash processes and saving costs by, once again, just by giving you that really comprehensive view over your data. And then finally, creating new revenue streams. This one I think is always really interesting because it's very often, once again, related to your ability to bring in and create connections between seemingly unrelated data. And so when you look at the kind of scope that an ERP system can contain, and then look at expanding that beyond into other data sources, it becomes really interesting, because how can you relate your sales data to your customer service data to supply chain data to help find these efficiencies and find these cost savings? And that's just really one of the major strengths of an ERP system. But, and moving forward, it's not always that easy. And specifically, it's very often a lack of integration between ERP data and other key systems that's what's actually impeding your ability to have a complete view over all of your data. Because, of course, ERP systems can be incredibly comprehensive, but if you're unable to enhance that with other data sets, other key data sources, or even just have a complete view over that data or the ability to operate over it with a variety of tools and technology, then you're limited in the value and the insights that you can get from that data. And that's really, the big problem is it's not enough just to have that data. It's really about what can you do with it. And so that's really where we see this disconnect is companies have the ERP data, they have the platforms, but they lack the integration and other technologies needed to really make full use and full value of that data. So for example, moving forward, you can see that other key sources of data include customer signals or on new sources of revenue, CRM data and marketing data can be really essential to a lot of those key insights I mentioned earlier, customer service or developing new revenue streams. It'd be really powerful to have CRM and marketing data cleanly integrated with the rest of your ERP system. And IoT and real-time data is another really common source to look to integrate with your larger set of ERP data. Web devices, sensors, it's becoming more and more common to have potentially millions of items being integrated through a variety of services, whether it's sensors or other transactional systems. Manufacturing plants increasingly rely on this sort of IoT data. And once again, the more you can integrate this data, the more value you can bring. And so that's really kind of the crux of what we'll be talking about today, is how do we give you that integration and give you those tools to bring together not only all of your ERP data, but also these other key sources like customer signals, like real-time data, in order to give you a complete view over your data and thus the ability to drive those really valuable insights. So I'm going to pass it back to David to talk a little bit about what this lack of integration can do and the problems it can cause.
Thanks, Matt. So the lack of integration between these ERP systems, it gets in the way of being able to get that data when you need it. And specifically in our case, we're discussing SAP, which is, I'd say, inherently complex is an understatement. It's phenomenally complex. There are tens of thousands of tables. Some of them are real, some of them are virtual tables. They're all in shorthand 5-digit German codes, which it's very difficult to understand as well. And so being able to just go in to those systems and try and extract information is very difficult. And being able to do it in any sort of rapid time set has been traditionally a real problem. Even the built-in tooling for SAP, their business warehouse is usually on a 24-hour lag. So the best you can get is understanding what happened yesterday. And so that's hard to make decisions in the moment when you are always running on latent data. And that creates lost opportunities for agility, for making changes, and for getting ahead of problems before they impact the entire organization. So what are the different roadblocks that you run across? So being able to inability to use data outside of SAP. SAP is relatively good at working with SAP data as long as you stay inside of the ecosystem. They have a fair amount of tooling, they have a fair amount of movement, but people are moving away from these single silo ERP scenarios. They want to use things like Azure Synapse because of its ability to do a lot more with the data on a single platform. We've already talked about the fact that it's slow. They're always behind. You're never getting ahead of a problem. Things like custom appliances like HANA become very, very expensive. You have to buy this big expensive thing, and then you have to license this big expensive thing, and this big expensive thing is limited on how much data you can put into it. There's no elasticity, there's no expansion. If you need more, you have to go buy another big expensive thing. And it becomes hard, right? SAP is still based on ABAP. ABAP is, old 4GL programming type language, right? It's not modern. It's not SQL. It's not Python. It's expensive. All of the care and feeding is hard to maintain by an organization. You have to have a lot of overhead for the care and feeding of an SAP that you don't need when you move to something more modern. So Matt, I'll kind of turn it back over to you to keep it going.
Yeah, thank you so much. So that was the first chapter of this presentation, just talking about, of course, some of the value you can get out of these SAP systems, but also the roadblocks you may face in doing that. So now David and I will talk a bit about the analytics-ready solutions available for you through Synapse and through Qlik that help you work with both this SAP and non-SAP data. So we'll start by going over Azure Synapse. This is a big slide with a lot going on, but we'll walk through each of it. For those of you that may not know, of course, the overall power of Azure Synapse is that it's a limitless analytics service with unmatched time to insight. And the way it does that is by unifying a lot of those core capabilities that you find in really any data platform. And you can see right there in the middle that we have our two primary analytics runtimes of both SQL and Spark. And you'll see both of these in action during the demo, as well as working over a unified Azure Data Lake storage that enables you to really easily consolidate and load data into it before working with it with both these SQL and Spark runtimes. We also provide the Azure Synapse Studio, which provides a unified development experience that enables you to not just write your SQL queries and edit your Spark notebooks, but also to perform a lot of these, cross-platform tasks like management, monitoring, security. And then on top of that, not only does it provide this first-class unified experience across this core functionality, but it also integrates really closely with a variety of other essential Azure data services. So things like Azure Data Share, enabling you to take this data and share it with other teams or other companies with strong governance policies. Azure Machine Learning, the ability to register and leverage these models to operationalize them and really scale out your predictions across your company. And of course, Power BI, providing powerful visualizations and a lot of those deep dive and granularity capabilities that we talked about earlier directly on top of your data in Synapse. And in the demo later, we'll actually see some of this integration with Azure Machine Learning and Power BI specifically live and show you the work that we've done to really make Azure Synapse that unified development experience for a lot of your analytics. So moving forward and showing how this works kind of at a step higher, really the strength of this Qlik and Azure Synapse pipeline is that they both perform their specific tasks and bring a lot of power to those tasks, while then integrating very closely as part of the larger pipeline. So when you look at any data pipeline, of course, there's really two major steps. There's the ingestion and transformation stage, and then the actual serving or analytics stage. So here you can see that Qlik really comes in to provide that data warehouse automation and that data integration stage, enabling you to pull this data out of SAP really easily and land it into your data lake or land it into your data warehouse, where then there you can leverage the scale and performance of Synapse to work with that data further, develop machine learning models, and then leverage things like Power BI to build visualizations on top of these. And so that's really why we're so excited about this kind of partnership and the work that we've done here, is because it really is a super complete and cohesive story. And that's what we'll try and show off in the demos in a bit, is the ability of Qlik to really easily pull this data out, automate a lot of this process, really help you get the schema going. And David, I'll let you elaborate on a lot of that functionality there, and then get into Synapse, where you'll see our ability to take advantage of built-in machine learning and the performance and scale of the data warehouse. So from here, David, I'll flip it back to you to talk a little bit more about the uses that you can do with this SAP data once you've landed it into these platforms.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So, we're calling it is unleashing your SAP data. As we talked about, it's SAP tends to try and lock everything into its box. But once you get that information out into agile platforms, you can do so much more with that information. So using Qlik to take that SAP data into modern data lakes or cloud data warehouses, and specifically Synapse in this scenario, gives you a lot of opportunities. You can rapidly now develop new solutions. You can prototype, you can test without impacting the OLTP system. So the ERP will do its thing and chug along and keep track of all the inventory and sales and financial stuff, and that's great. But you can now get that information out, turn it into something that a data warehouse person would recognize, make it easy to use, make it consumable, and start putting modern tooling in front of it as well, like Power BI. So you can really now drive that those capabilities to the user by freeing your SAP data. Past that, you can now take advantage of cool things like machine learning, right? So being able to not only get we talked about being behind with the data in SAP. Now we're going to be able to use some of those ML engines that we have inside of Azure and really start pushing it forward. Okay, what are my, I can look at my schedules, I can look at my delivery, I can incorporate additional information. Maybe it's weather, and I can start predicting, hey, I've told customer X their widgets are going to be there by Wednesday. There's a snowstorm coming in. I can link up with UPS. I can link up with weather and say, you know what? I think we're going to be probably 2 days behind on delivering that. I can now let that customer know that that's going to happen. I can get proactive because I've got additional tools available to me. We also now can get real time. As data changes, we can push that information out. We can do it in a multitude of different ways, right? We can push it into a warehouse. We can push it into a Kafka stream and send out messages to other systems. So there's a whole lot that we can do now that our data is being pushed in real time, and we're doing that with change data capture. So let me go ahead and move on a little bit and talk about what we've done with our partnership. So Qlik and Microsoft have been partnered for a very long time, and I know there's this old a lot of people know Qlik from the world of analytics. Well, but you guys are QlikView and QlikSense, and then we're Power BI. Why are you here? Well, the backstory on this is about almost 2 years now, or at least a year and a half ago. Qlik acquired Attunity, and Attunity and Microsoft have been working together for a very long time. And we're not doing anything to disrupt that partnership. In fact, we've enhanced it with being able to, what we'll see in the demo, be able to do full suite solutions leveraging Qlik data integration. So this data integration component of Qlik is what we're going to be working with to really put all this power of SAP, all this useful data into this agile platform. So being able to create these end-to-end pipelines, being able to extract the data out of SAP as it's happening with change data capture, transform it into a modern data warehouse using a modern data warehousing platform like Azure Synapse, and then being able to do all of the additional analytics, whether it's machine learning, whether it's Power BI, whether it's other systems. Well, we're going to be able to create that. We're going to be able to pull information that's outside of SAP, Salesforce, things like that, and be able to encapsulate that and really start getting a full purview of enterprise data all in a single view. And again, that end-to-end pipeline is what we're going to be showing here in a few minutes. And the goal is to get the data to the people that need it to be able to act on it, whether it's analysts, whether it's data scientists, whether it's financial analysts, whoever needs that information. They're no longer like, boy, I'd sure like to know what our close of business look like. I've only got another 18 hours before I get my update. No, you don't have to wait anymore. So Qlik data integration is optimized for SAP and Azure. We do a ton of work between the two companies as Synapse has been evolving very rapidly. We're working right with them there. I work with Matt. We work with each other's teams to make sure that we're synchronized. That as our product evolves, or products evolve, we're taking advantage of the new capabilities that are coming in with Synapse as it continues to expand its footprint and power. And so what are we bringing to the table with the Qlik part specifically? What is the data integration part bringing? Well, we bring in real-time data ingestion with change data capture. So this is a kind of a fire and forget system, and we'll show in the demo where we point at SAP, and we've got a number of different components that we can connect to in the SAP land. And we hit go, and that data is extracted and then kept synchronized with Synapse. And so that is happening in real time as transactions come through. On top of that, we can also create automated transformations and model this information into a real data warehouse. For those of you that ever looked at SAP BW, it's not really a great design for a data warehouse. It's not, doesn't follow anybody's plan. It's not a data vault. It's not Inman. It's not Kimball style. It's kind of their own thing, and that's fine. But there are real data warehouses for a reason, and so we can automate the creation of that information with Qlik. Using that SAP metadata as well. So we're going to be able to do more than just, hey, look, 5-digit German shorthand codes. Okay, that's great, but that doesn't help me. What's my net profit? What is my current inventory status for widget X, right? So turning that information, leveraging the SAP metadata to make it business friendly, as well as handling things like currency, handling things like multi-language scenarios, right? We're doing all of that with the Qlik data integration tools. And there are years and years of SAP customers and SAP certified solutions that Qlik has worked with, specifically in the Azure system. We've been doing this for a very long time. Atuni's been around for 20 some odd years. Qlik's been around for close to 30 years. So we've been doing this. We've got a proven base of success. And we, again, coming back to this, it's no small effort to understate how important it is that we are constantly engaged with the Azure Synapse team and the Microsoft greater entity as a whole, that we are having weekly and daily, to some extent, check-ins. We have named people that are responsible for that relationship on both the Qlik side and the Microsoft side. So we are fully linked here to provide successful outcomes to our customers. So let's dive down just a little bit into kind of the details of how it all fits together. So where it comes in on the left side here is we see all of the SAP parts, and SAP parts are many. There's S3, there's S4, there's HANA, there's all kinds of fun things that SAP likes to have called with different packages. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to us. If it's an SAP system, we're going to be able to take advantage of it. Whether we're going at the base tables with transports, whether we're going at extractors, there's any number of ways that we'll talk about in the demo that we could take advantage of SAP data, whether it's on HANA, whether it's S3, whether it's S4, whether it's HR, whether it's whatever module it is. But we're not limited to that. There are always other data systems inside of an enterprise, whether they're legacy Oracle systems, whether there's mainframes, other data warehouse platforms like Teradata that you need to pull data out of, cloud data platforms, Salesforce, Workday, things like that are very important sources of information. So we can pull all of that information in using our replication tool. And so that will give us that Qlik data integration piece where we're going to start replicating the data. Then we're going to apply on top of that the data model generation. And we're going to create the schemas. We'll generate all the SQL. We'll push that back down to Synapse to do the processing. And then we'll generate the documentation. We've got workflow orchestration. And at the end of it, we've gone from a pile of SAP data, and that's loosely coupled, very complex, very disorganized, and now it's been normalized into this really clean, easy to use, analytics ready data mart with a fact and common dimensions. We have a warehouse behind it that's been modeled usually in like a data vault style, because that's kind of what's popular right now, and that provides the conduit for Power BI to pick up, for the Azure ML stuff to pick up, or other tooling inside of the Azure platform, right? We've created a clean, easy to use analytics repository that's ready to go. And we're managing all of the process. We're managing all the SQL to get you there. We're managing all of the ABAP coding that pulls the data out. That's the automation that Qlik Data Integration provides for extracting this data out of SAP and putting it into Synapse. But Matt, you know what? I think it's more important, or more, at least more interesting, to see it in action than look at a slide. What do you think?
Yeah, I've presented enough of these big messy Synapse architectures to know that it goes over a lot better just showing it happen. So
excellent. All right, so let's go ahead now, and we're gonna go ahead and take a walk through what we've got as far as looking through this demo. So let me just give you a little bit of preface, and hopefully my screen is coming through okay. What we've got is a scenario that we've already built out, and Matt will talk a little bit at the end here about the offering, but we chose a relatively important use case from SAP called orders to cash. Now, orders to cash is the process where a customer orders a widget from a company. That widget is then scheduled for delivery. That widget is pulled out of inventory. That widget is delivered. That widget is then billed to the customer, and that customer then, we sit there and wait for the customer to pay us, right? So all of those metrics from around the sales process, potentially, although we'll talk about this with how we pull in Salesforce, but around the creation of that sales document and all of the transformations through the orders to cash process, we've been captured. So this is all part of the sales and distribution module out of SAP, but this is a particularly hard process. It's something like 35 to 40 screens you got to go through if you want to follow the flow of a document transforming from order to billing to accounting receivable document. So what do we do? How do we do that? How do we manage this process with Qlik? Well, we start by going and getting the data that we need. And here's an example where we are using a connector back to the SAP system. Now, what's interesting about this is that I mentioned a little bit earlier that we have a couple different ways of pulling information. Now, in this use case, what we've done is instead of using the base tables, your VBAPs and your VBEPs and your MERAs and your KNA ones and stuff like that, we've actually leveraged the extractors. And the reason why we use the extractors in this case is because there's a lot of work that's been done to get the data prepped for a warehouse of BW. So these are the BW extractors. We go in using part of the tooling from Replicate to enable, to turn these on, enable these. And for any of you that are hardcore SAP people, you're going to be like, okay, yeah, FIAR4, GL10. Yeah, I'm familiar with these structures. I understand what they're bringing, and it's cool because they're merging 2, 3, 4 SAP tables together already to create a conformed output. So that's great. We're going to take advantage of a lot of business logic in process by leveraging these extractors. A more interesting, is that this is also a cost savings element to some extent because there is licensing considerations with going against the base tables in SAP. There's Open Hub licenses required potentially, and other things to be considered. But by using the extractors, these are fully BAPI recognized objects, and they are not only supported, but actually we are certified with SAP for these connections. They are transports that get installed inside of the SAP system, whether it's S3 or S4. We don't care. They work the same against either one. But that's it. We picked the information we need. In this case, it's about 27 tables, including, you can see down here, we've got a custom extractor for managing currency. Again, doesn't matter what the extractor is. We pick it, we run it, we replicate, and we land the data into Synapse. That's it. That's what this process is doing. Now, once we've landed that data into Synapse, that's when we start applying this data warehousing construct that we talked about. So what exactly does that mean? So what we've got is those tables that we picked, or I'm sorry, not really tables, those extractors that we picked. We've gone in and landed that information into Synapse, but we've done a little bit more than that. What we actually did on top of landing the data is we applied the metadata. So we've taken the information out of the DDO4L and the DDO3T tables and applied that over the top of the raw metadata from SAP. So we actually can understand things like, okay, well, this is my zero customer extractor, but here's what's going on with that. This is client, MND is client, ERDAT is created on date. Going down, looking at that information, if I want to go look at sales items, right? I got my item information, and we've done all of this renaming information so that a user, whether they're looking for the technical term or the business friendly term, can use the information. So that's the first step, is getting the information and running the transform. Then we actually have to go in and define how the information flows. So, what is the transformation process for orders to cash? How does customer connect and flow through, my sales documents, my billing documents, my scheduling line items, through my sales document headers and sales item status headers and sales item status line details. And so we create these models, and we can actually hit the key button here, and you can see that we're going through and actually recognizing and building this. This is all drag and drop, how this information will flow and process to create a warehouse. And at the end of the day, what we end up with is a warehouse. And this warehouse, we've gone through, we create, we create all the mappings. And what Compose does, click Compose here, it creates all of the ETL to manage, populate, and run change data capture on this data. So it creates all the tables, it creates all the keys, it manages all the surrogates, it creates all the hub and spoke tables for the data vault, and it manages all of that through SQL that is pushed down and run on Synapse. So now we've gone from raw data to modeling what it would look like in a warehouse, to creating the warehouse and managing the warehouse from a change data capture and change point of view, a delta point of view. And then what we do at the end is we then create the analytics ready data marts. So whether it's sales orders, schedules, billing, shipments, etc., we create this model. and it's a clean dimensional star schema. Now, some of you that are familiar with SAP may look at this and go, hey, those kind of look like what a BW cube might look like. And you're kind of correct. We didn't exactly make them look like BW cubes, but we did design them to be kind of based on those subject areas. Somebody who might want to come in and look at sales order lines or schedule lines. And you can see that what we've got is a conformed set of dimensions that are actually not only easy to use, but they're taking in all of the attribute information and combining it into a single view. For example, for customer, the customer output dimension is going to be customer attribute combined with customer text and country key. So it's going to have this textual information in a single dimensional entity. If I look at material, it's the same thing, right? We're going to blend all of this information into a single material dimension. Now, these are what we call here, even kind of looking at the little icons, these are transactional data marts. Well, what does a transactional data mart mean? It means that we've got all the raw information in this entity. So you can come in and run queries on the raw information. There's no aggregation. This is just the data at the lowest level of information. So if I come over and look at my sales unit, document currency, these are net price, net value, all of that information. This is just the raw data. Now we've also taken the additional step, which is really interesting, is that Compose also can create aggregate data marts. So these are really great for your casual analysts to come in and be able to consume. So these are really great for things like Power BI because we've actually done all the heavy lifting in creating the data mart. Total net value, total net price, total cost of orders, total ordered amount, number of shipped to customers, number of sold to customers with this common set of dimensions. So we've created, again, aggregated summations of the data for those analysts. So now that we've got this information, we've replicated the data, we've transformed the data, now we can catalog the information. So this is where Qlik Catalog comes in, and we're able to go attach to that Synapse instance or multiple of them, and we actually go and mine the information. So now if I come over and I look for stuff that's tagged as being in orders to cash, and I think I've logged out here. Yeah, security works. It's always good to know, right? So let me come back in and search for stuff that's been tagged as orders to cash. And this is a metadata catalog, right? So I can come over and I can look at my aggregate sales metrics, which you just looked at a second ago. And I can come over and, for example, look at my lineage, and I can see that this has gone from Replicate through Compose to Synapse. We've tagged this information, and I have the ability to consume this information directly in Power BI. So it's pretty interesting that I can see the lineage. I can go back now and look at everything about this. I can kind of see all of the information about the metadata, min values, max values, get some profiling of the information. I can see down here any metadata that's been tagged to this. And I get this sort of catalog view of the information. I can go look at a sample if I want, right? So here's the first 100 records, just to make sure that it's kind of what I was expecting it to be, right? And the cool part about this is at the end of the day, not only can I shop through all of this catalog, I can come over and say, hey, this looks really interesting. So I'm going to add it to my cart. And I'm going to come over and I say, I want to publish this to Power BI. I'm going to call this demo O2C, and I'll hit proceed, and it will now take this information that I'm looking at and push it over as a work set into Power BI. So it's done with that now. So I will come over to my Power BI SaaS template here, and I can see, oh, there it is. There's my demos orders to cash, and at this point I could come over and create a report off of it. And I can see that, maybe I want to look at total net value. Well, I'll just drag that over here and I'll turn that into a KPI, and there we go. Just like that, I looked at my information in the catalog. I can see the lineage. I can understand about the data. I can shop for it, add it to my cart, and start consuming it in Power BI. And eventually, what you can end up doing is build very complicated information off of this data set. So I don't know why I can't click on it. Oh, there it is. Sales order metric. So here's an example of a Power BI dashboard that I built on top of that output, where I've got all of the sales order metrics, but I've also gone and pulled in Salesforce. So I can now also see where we at in the process of before we close these deals. What are the total amounts that we've won? What do we have that's open? How many open opportunities? Where are our opportunities by stage? Who are the top, top opportunities by rep? And so we're now blending that SAP information with something externally like Salesforce to complete that enterprise data story. All right, so that's kind of all I had for my demo. Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you to really fully encapsulate and expand on what we can do with the Synapse top of this data.
No, thank you so much, David. And I really love, this set of demos in particular, because I think it shows off how the two services complement each other so incredibly well. And just the ability for, Synapse gives you the scale and the analytics functionality you need to really dive into this data. But then Qlik gives you the integration and that automation. And the two of those together is really what lets you operate at scale. Synapse lets you have petabytes of data, and Qlik helps you manage potentially hundreds or thousands of tables with the cataloging and the automation. So always love to show these things off. So I've flipped in. David, can you confirm you can see my screen?
You are green. I can see it. Looks good.
All right, perfect. So we flipped over to the Synapse Studio, and really in these last 15 minutes or so we have the demo. I just want to show off some of the functionality within Azure Synapse and how it complements what we've been talking about and what David has showed you in terms of unlocking insights from SAP and other data. So here in Synapse, you can see here we've got this is the home page, and you can already start to see down this left side the different hubs in Synapse that represent the different core capabilities. And specifically, we'll be spending most of our time here around the data hubs and the develop hubs, because that's what will allow us to explore this data that's being loaded in from Qlik, both potentially unstructured and structured data, as well as looking at some of the Spark notebooks and SQL scripts that we'll be using to work with this data and train some models. So in the interest of time, we'll flip right over to the data hub, and we'll get this out of the way to give us a bit more room. And you can see here already that within Synapse, we have the concept of workspace data and linked data. This basically represents data that's stored directly within the workspace or the kind of the Synapse environment itself versus data sources that are technically external, but very closely integrated and that you can still work with directly. So for example, looking over here at the workspace data, you can see a SQL pool here. And this is that classic data warehouse experience that many of you may be familiar with, just of course optimized and modernized for the cloud. So within this data warehouse, we've got our tables, we've got stored procedures, security models. This represents a relational set of data with its own compute associated with it. And expanding this table, we can, for example, choose this materials order table. And you can see here that even though it's living within a SQL data warehouse, we have a variety of different ways to work with this data. I can open up new SQL scripts, I can load it into a Spark notebook, or I can open data flows or even exist with machine learning models, which we'll actually circle back to in just a few minutes. And if I flipped over to my linked data sources, the primary one we'll be looking at here is an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. And you can see here that once again, I have a Storage Explorer experience here to go through my data lake. And if we just pick, a random set of files, you can see here that not only can I preview this data right here from the Synapse Studio, but I have that same set of operations. I have SQL scripts, Spark notebooks, data flows, integration data sets. And really the goal here is to show that with Azure Synapse, I talked about the goal being to unify a lot of this experience, And part of that is unifying the tools that your data engineers and data analysts have to work with that data, regardless of whether it's living in the data lake and the data or the data warehouse. And the goal is really to blur those lines. So, whether you're using Qlik to land data directly in the data lake in a more raw format, or you're using it to process and automate that data directly in your data warehouse, the experience for your engineers and analysts is still seamless, whether they prefer to use Spark or SQL for that further analysis. So flipping back to our workspace data and our SQL pool, we talked about the idea of being able to enhance this data, and the goal being, that even once you bring in this SAP data and unify it with other data sources, commonly you're going to want to enhance that with, for example, machine learning. And so we've done a lot of work here to really bring together that ML story within Azure Synapse and also with Azure Machine Learning. So I'm going to start by flipping over to the Develop Hub. And you can see here we've got Power Queries, SQL scripts, Spark Notebooks, and Power BI. But we'll actually start here with a book. Of course, Spark being the open source language that it is, has a lot of different functionality you can bring into it. And one of those is, of course, machine learning. And so you can see here, we will go through this pretty quickly. Obviously, there's a lot of code here, and we just don't have enough time to cover it. But really, this Spark notebook is training a model over some of that data that we've loaded in from SAP. And what I really want to point out here is the integration with Azure Machine Learning. So if we keep going down, we can see here that we're actually configuring AutoML and submitting an AutoML run to Azure Machine Learning from this Spark notebook here in Azure Synapse. And what that means is we're actually leveraging AutoML and its ability to automatically train and identify different models we can use, and also then register that model in Azure Machine Learning. And we'll actually see that once we've registered that model in Azure Machine Learning, of course, we can track versioning and track updates on it. Your data scientist can work with that model from the Azure Machine Learning workbench if they don't want to use a Spark notebook here in Synapse. And then when it comes time to operationalize this model and actually scale it out and start training data with it, you'll see that we can then once again leverage that model registry. So here in Spark, you can leverage the Spark clusters to train your model over data in your data lake. And when it comes time to operationalize it, I'm going to flip back to my data warehouse. Let's choose material orders. And let's go to this enrich with existing model. And this is actually very new. I think if we did this presentation a week ago, we wouldn't have been able to see this. So this is really exciting to show off. So I click that enrich with existing model, and you'll see here that we're connecting to an existing Azure Machine Learning workspace. And you can see here, I have a variety of models that have already been registered in this AML workspace. You can see here, I can see who they've been created by, what version they are, when they've been updated. And I can click on one of these models, click continue. And then from here, it starts to give me options to map this source table, the source columns expected from my model to the inputs of that table that I clicked on originally. So you can see here, I chose a random model for the sake of time, so it's not mapping automatically, or it's a little confused. But then I can also map my output, and this is the column that my training results or my scoring results will actually land in. So I'm producing an entirely new column here called quantity for this model specifically. I can load that into a stored procedure and also choose a table to load that model into. And so this is a completely automated process. I can deploy that model and it automatically opens up that stored procedure script. So it's ready for me to run. And then I'm ready to start operationalizing this model. So for the sake of time, I'm going to flip over to a SQL script where I've already done this, this predict material gross. And so you can see here, I'm running this. We can open up this models table. This is the table that's actually storing my model in the Onyx format. And that's once again an option that you have when you're registering that model in AML, is to choose this Onyx format because that's operable with the SQL pool here. So we can also look at this table we'll be running over, this material orders. And you can see here, this is all of the columns I have in materials order. And so from here, we now want to take this model that we've previously loaded into our SQL pool, and this is the SQL script that will actually be running. So you can see here we're running over material orders, and we're actually creating this new column from the predict statement here. So this variable 1, which we're then renaming as total gross, is a model that's completely created by scoring this data with that machine learning model. So if I go ahead and run this, which should hopefully only take a few seconds, yeah, you can see that I have all of the original columns from material orders and this new total gross column. And each one of these results is actually completely generated fresh by predicting and running that machine learning model off of all of these other columns. And like I mentioned before, this is completely in-engine scoring. We're not sending REST APIs. We're not taking this elsewhere. And the power of this in-engine scoring is a couple different things. The big being that we are taking advantage of the compute and the scale of the SQL pool directly. And so we've done demos, running these models over tens of millions of rows and still getting results back quickly, because that's what a Synapse SQL pool is optimized for: complicated queries over massive amounts of data. And we made sure that Predict is also able to handle that. You don't risk scalability issues or connection issues from other APIs or external services. It's all happening directly in the engine. And so we see this as a really powerful way of enriching your data with machine learning models in a really streamlined process. You load that data in from Qlik, you enrich with other data sources, and then you can directly start training your models with Spark and then operationalizing those models directly in SQL. And because these results are directly in a SQL table format, anything that can consume the SQL pool can automatically get these updated results. So you bring in a Power BI report, or you encase this in a view, and to your data analysts, they don't need to know the underlying complexity of models being trained and predicted. They're just seeing this column as a new table result, constantly up to date with the rest of their data, that they can then embed in reports or visualizations and generate insights off of. So we see this as a really exciting integration that leverages everything we talked about: the scale of the SQL pools, the integration with Azure Machine Learning, Spark within Azure Synapse, and of course, leveraging all of the data you're bringing in through this integration with Qlik that you can pull directly from SAP. So a few other things I want to show off. We talked about these core analytical queries that you'd be running. Oops, let's try this again. Oops, sorry, I need to run this over the right data warehouse. That would help. So this is your typical SQL query. We're doing counts and casts and joins and group bys. And one of the great things about Azure Synapse is not only do you get this great just analyst query experience, but you can also perform some simple data visualization without even having to leave the query engine here. So I have the ability to create column charts. Let's choose the sales off column, and let's sort just by the total count. And this is just a really powerful experience for analysts to just get immediate feedback on the types of queries that they're running, which they can then use to iterate on queries or manipulate data without even having to leave the context of this screen in particular. We talked a bit about security and the way that we bake that into every part of the product as well. I really want to quickly show off some of the row-level security that we built into Azure Synapse. So here I have another pretty simple query, just selecting from some location data. And specifically, we're going to run this as two different analysts, or I guess specifically run it as two of my coworkers. But in this context, you can imagine that they're analysts with different amounts of views into their data. So our first analyst, Perry, has views over all of the data. So he can view data from both California and New York. Let's pretend those are the only two states that exist. And so from here, you can see that scrolling through, I get a variety of data from New York and California. But let's flip over to running as Charles. And we can, Charles is a more regional analyst. He should only have access to data in his state of California. So if we now run this as Charles, but otherwise the exact same query, we'll see that we now get data that's only scoped to California. And the really important here is, like I said, the query itself has not changed. All we've changed is the user who is running that query. And that's the power of this native row-level security, is you can have a single table, a single set of data, but produce entirely different versions of that table based off the security permissions that I set. So, previously you'd have to do this with individually secured views, and Charles would have to know his view, and Perry would have to know his view, and it just becomes a management nightmare. But with row-level security, you can just have one table, And then from there, as these users come in, their permissions are automatically checked at query runtime. And based off the row level security and even column level security, which I don't even have time to show you, they'll see, sets of data that applies to those permissions. So the final thing I want to show before we close and move into Q&A is, of course, that integration with Power BI. So David showed you that Power BI report that they built earlier over this data. And you can go through and replicate that same report right here within Azure Synapse. And you get a Power BI development experience live right here in your Synapse Studio. So I can go through and I can edit or manipulate or dive into these reports. And then all I have to do is hit save. And then this is automatically updated and pushed out to Power BI, where the rest of my enterprise can then go through and view this report and view any edits I've made to it. And so you can see that Synapse provides, a really complete story from, bringing this data and preparing it, leveraging machine learning through Spark to train models over that data, operationalizing them with SQL, putting in automatic security controls like row level security, and then finally building and editing these Power BI reports to really scale this data out to your entire enterprise. Once again, leveraging all of the data that we've built and we've gotten in from Qlik to really easily integrate this data from not just SAP, but other sources. So from there, David and I will pull up a few more slides to just kind of close and talking about the offering and the kind of integration we built between Qlik and Synapse. And then we will end by going over any questions you may have. David, do you have the slides ready?
I think I do, but it doesn't seem to let me pull something I've already pulled back up. So
I think I have them ready to go as well. So
okay. Excellent. Perfect. Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so we will be here. Let me pull this open. Yeah, so like we talked about, we've introduced as kind of part of this integration and to really help you get hands-on with it, we've introduced this free proof of value for Synapse, Qlik, and Power BI for SAP. So on the Microsoft side, we offer free deep dive sessions and free half-day solution workshops with Synapse expert support to help you get hands-on. We'll offer free software subscriptions for a Synapse Analytics Data Warehouse and Power BI for the duration of your proof of value, and also provide free technical and subject matter expertise for the duration of the POV as well, just to once again really give you the expert support that you need to help do a proof of value over these technologies. And David, if you want to talk about what Qlik offers as well.
Yep, and I mean we kind of covered a little bit earlier, but again, it's the real-time data integration support, being able to help get the part for Replicate installed on SAP, working with the data integration team to help understand the this is what you need to enable the extractors. Are there some customizations we need to be aware of? And then getting into the part where we go through and, this is the model that we have. Are there assumptions that we need to change based on the way that you run your business process? So, hopefully minimal adjustments, but that's the part that we're going to bring to our table, is that SAP implementation experience.
Yeah, and so like we said, this is a 2-week proof of value to really help you get hands-on with these solutions to help you work with both your SAP and non-SAP data. So you can get started at that link today, aka.ms/synapse-qlik. There's a get started link there. There's a link to a webinar, which should have a lot of similar content here if you want to dive into that on your own time, as well as more information about how to get started. So definitely encourage you to check out that link, and we'll make sure that gets dropped in the chat as well, so you have a record of it. And from there, we'll stay here, but we'll now move into questions. David, I can't see the chat from sharing. Are there any questions, or please feel free to come off mute as well?
Yeah, there are not any so far, but yes.
Oh. Doesn't look like there's any questions. If anybody wants to ask anything, go ahead and take yourself off mute and fire away, or either just type in the chat box there. Other than that, I think it's 1:59, and go ahead and have a great Friday. Thanks, guys, for presenting. I really appreciate it, Matt and Dave.
Thanks so much. And I believe both our LinkedIn's are linked in the chat as well.